When God raises his voice and says yes, it doesn't matter who stands against you because his word has power. And when he decides to open a way, no one can close it. His yes breaks chains, tears down obstacles, and creates paths where there were only deserts before. Sometimes, dear listener, people may judge you, point fingers at you, or even underestimate you, but when God has determined to bless you, his purpose will be fulfilled, even if the whole world says otherwise. That is the greatness of his divine authority. And I want you to know something. If you are here listening to this message, it is not by coincidence. It's because God has something to tell you today. Maybe you feel tired, disappointed, or without strength, but this word is here to remind you that when God approves something in your life, no one can stop what he has already begun. Part 1. The power of God's yes. When God says yes, the entire universe aligns with his word. Nothing and no one can contradict what the Creator has determined. His authority does not depend on men, governments, or circumstances. His authority comes from his very essence. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Everything that exists was created by his word, and everything that remains is sustained by his will. Many people put their trust in what they can see, in connections, in money, in titles, in opportunities. But God's yes goes far beyond the natural. When he gives his approval, even what seemed impossible begins to take shape. It's as if his voice gives a command in heaven, and all of creation begins to move to fulfill it. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 13, God says, "From before the day existed, I am, and no one can deliver out of my hand. What I do, who can stop it?" That declaration sums up the absolute authority of God. There is no power that can stop what he decides to do. There is no enemy that can hinder his purpose. Dear listener, sometimes we struggle to believe in that power because we see our circumstances and they seem bigger than our promises. But what we must understand is that God's yes does not depend on what you see. It depends on who he is. If God has said that something will happen in your life, it will happen, even if everything seems to be against you. Remember Joseph, sold by his brothers, betrayed, forgotten, and imprisoned. Everything indicated that his story would end in defeat, but God's yes remained over his life. Despite the years, the trials, and the tears, the divine plan did not stop. When the time came, God raised him as governor of Egypt, proving that his word never returns empty. And that same thing can happen with you. Perhaps you have gone through seasons where everything you hoped for was delayed, where you prayed and saw no results, where doors closed again and again. But God's yes does not expire, it doesn't fade with time. What he has spoken, he will fulfill. God doesn't speak just to speak, he decrees, and what he decrees becomes reality. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20, "For all the promises of God are in him yes, and in him amen." This means that when God makes a promise, there is no room for doubt. His yes does not depend on the opinions of others, nor on timing, nor on circumstance. His yes is eternal, firm, and sealed by his faithfulness. Now think about this. How many times have you stopped believing because others told you that you couldn't? How many times have you doubted because someone closed a door or turned their back on you? We often forget that the final word doesn't belong to people, but to God. What he speaks comes to pass. What he approves is manifested. And what he supports prospers. When God says yes, even your enemies end up being instruments for his purpose. He uses everything, even what seems negative, to take you to the place he has prepared. Remember that in Joseph's story, it was precisely the betrayal that led him to his destiny. God's yes used the evil intentions of others to fulfill his divine plan. That's how God works. He doesn't need perfect conditions to bless you. He doesn't need everyone to be on your side. He only needs your trust. Because when he decides to say yes, nothing can cancel his will. Human rejection doesn't change God's yes. Temporary failure doesn't erase his eternal plan. And delay doesn't mean denial. It means preparation. Dear listener, sometimes God allows everything to fall apart, not because he has forgotten you, but because he is clearing the path for his yes. He knows what he's removing, what he's shifting, and what he's preparing. You see chaos, but he sees purpose. You see a closed door, but he sees direction. That's why you shouldn't despair when things don't turn out the way you expected. Sometimes today's apparent no is only the prelude to tomorrow's final yes. God is working behind the scenes, arranging every piece, preparing every step, aligning every detail so that when his moment comes, everything fits perfectly. When God says yes, no door can remain closed, no human word can contradict it, and no enemy can stop it. What he approves, no one can invalidate. His authority isn't negotiated, it is manifested. And when that authority touches your life, the impossible ceases to exist. So if today you find yourself waiting, if you feel that everything has come to a halt, remember this. You are not on pause, you are in process. And the process is part of the plan. Because when the moment of God's yes arrives, you will understand why everything had to happen the way it did. Divine authority needs no permission, no justification, and no explanation. It simply acts. And when it acts, it transforms your story, changes your direction, and proves that his word always has the final say. Part 2. How to recognize God's yes in your life. When God says yes, we often don't notice it right away because his ways are different from ours. We want quick results, clear signs, and easy paths. But in his wisdom, God often hides his yes behind processes that shape our character. That's why one of the greatest challenges of faith is learning to recognize when he has already said yes, even when we don't yet see anything happening. Dear listener, there are moments when God's yes comes quietly, not through a voice from heaven or a visible miracle, but through peace. That peace that fills your heart when the anxiety fades, when you stop trying to control everything, when you finally realize that if you are walking with him, everything else will fall into place in its time. That peace is the first sign of God's yes. It's not an ordinary peace. It's the peace that surpasses all understanding, the kind that stands firm even when circumstances haven't changed yet. That peace is God's way of saying, trust, it is done. At other times, God's yes is revealed through doors that open at the most unexpected moments. You've tried again and again by your own strength, with no results, and suddenly something happens. An opportunity appears, someone reaches out, a change unfolds, and then you realize it wasn't coincidence, it was direction, because when God opens a door, no one can close it. The book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 7 says, "This is what the Holy One, the true one, the one who has the key of David, says, the one who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens." That is the essence of divine authority. God's yes doesn't need anyone else's approval. If he decides to open a way for you, it will open, even if the entire world says it's impossible. But sometimes God's yes doesn't appear as an open door, but as a delay. Yes, God can say yes, but not yet. And that's what many people don't understand. Delay doesn't always mean denial. Sometimes it means protection. Sometimes God doesn't give you what you're asking for because he first wants to give you what you need to sustain it. He doesn't want you to arrive too soon. He wants you to arrive prepared. That's why there are situations where God has already said yes, but he's waiting for your heart to be ready. He is not only interested in giving you blessings, but in forming you so you won't lose what he gives. Because an early yes can become a burden, but a yes in God's perfect time becomes a lasting blessing. Look at the story of Abraham. God promised him a son, but years passed before that promise was fulfilled. Not because God changed his mind, but because his yes had a time. And during that time, Abraham learned to trust, to wait, to depend completely on God's voice. When Isaac was finally born, Abraham was no longer the same man. He had learned that God's yes not only produces fruit, but also teaches patience. And that's something we all need to understand. God's yes doesn't always mean that everything will be easy. Sometimes his yes comes with challenges, trials, and silence. But even in those moments, his will remains good, pleasing, and perfect. What matters most is not to confuse God's silence with his denial, because silence is often the space where he does his deepest work. Dear listener, when God says yes, he also prepares you to handle it. What comes from God requires maturity, discernment, and faith. If he is going to lift you higher, he must first ground you deeper. If he is going to bless you greatly, he must first strengthen you privately. If he is going to trust you with more, he must first test your faithfulness in the little. And that too is part of his yes. His training is confirmation that something great is coming. So when you feel like you're in a season of testing, don't think that God has forgotten you. On the contrary, you are probably closer than ever to His fulfillment. The enemy doesn't attack what has no value. He fights what carries purpose. So when you feel resistance, when things get harder right before a breakthrough, don't lose heart. It might be the clearest sign that God's yes is about to manifest. Sometimes the enemy stirs up the storm right when heaven is about to open. It's not coincidence, and it's confirmation. And when that moment comes, you'll know. Not because someone tells you, but because everything inside you will feel it. You'll sense peace where there once was confusion. You'll see clarity where there once were doubts. And most importantly, you'll realize that you no longer depend on outcomes. You depend on God's presence. When God says yes, you no longer need approval. You no longer seek validation. You no longer fear what's ahead. You simply trust. That is the true fruit of divine affirmation, a faith that is mature, steady, and unshakable. A faith that doesn't change with the wind or die in the storm. A faith that doesn't chase signs, but rests in the voice that creates them. That's how divine authority works. It doesn't seek noise. It seeks purpose. It doesn't impose. It reveals. It doesn't need permission. It fulfills. Because when God says yes, His word becomes reality, and what once seemed unreachable becomes possible. Part 3. How to stay strong while waiting for God's yes. Dear listener, one of the hardest stages in a life of faith is not hearing God's no, but waiting for His yes. Waiting tests our hearts, our patience, and our trust. In that time, God's silence can feel confusing, our prayers may seem unheard, and our circumstances can make us question whether He truly has a plan. But let me tell you this, the waiting season is never wasted. It is the season where God prepares you to receive what He has already promised. When God says yes, He doesn't always act immediately. He is never in a hurry because He knows the end from the beginning. We want instant results, but God wants eternal ones. That's why, while you wait, He works. And while you feel like nothing is moving, everything is actually aligning in the unseen. Waiting is a school, and in that school you learn obedience, humility, and perseverance. Think of David. He was anointed by Samuel to be king, but he didn't sit on the throne right away. Years passed as he fled, hid, and endured injustice. Yet during that time, God was forming his heart. David wasn't just learning how to rule, he was learning how to serve with a heart after God. That is the purpose of waiting. It transforms you so that when God's yes finally arrives, you are ready to receive it without pride, without fear, and without losing direction. Many people miss their blessing because they give up too soon. They grow tired of praying, tired of believing, tired of waiting. But God's promises are not activated by anxiety. They are activated by steady faith. If you stop believing right before fulfillment, it's like abandoning your harvest just before the fruit ripens. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 3 says, "The vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it delays, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not delay." That means that when God has said yes, you can rest in the certainty that it will come. You may not know when, but you can know that it will. Dear listener, do not confuse waiting with abandonment. God has not forgotten you. He has not stopped listening. He is not indifferent to your prayers. He is simply working in His way. Sometimes the answer hasn't arrived because you are not yet in the right place, or because if He gave it to you now, you wouldn't be ready to sustain it. Other times, He uses the delay to teach you something you could never learn otherwise. Every day that passes, every tear, every trial, every silence has purpose. Nothing is wasted in His plan. God does not waste pain. There is no useless process in His design. Everything that happens to you has meaning in His story with you. That's why while you wait, don't stop moving in faith. Faith is not passive. Faith acts even when it cannot see. Faith obeys even when it doesn't understand. Faith keeps walking even when the road seems uncertain. In the waiting, keep praying. Even if nothing seems to change, keep talking to God. Because prayer doesn't always change the situation, but it always changes you. It strengthens you, centers you, and reminds you that you are not alone. In the waiting, keep worshiping, because when you worship in uncertainty, you are declaring that your trust is not in what you see, but in who He is. Worshipping in the waiting is telling God, I trust you even when I don't understand your silence. In the waiting, keep sowing. Help others, serve, give what you can, because the heart that sows in scarcity will be the first to reap when abundance comes. And above all, in the waiting, guard your faith. Do not let doubt become your daily companion. Do not let negative voices silence what God has spoken in your heart. Do not let weariness make you turn back. Faith is not measured by how many miracles you see, but by how many times you keep believing when you don't see any. God knows what you are enduring. He sees your effort, your faithfulness, your secret tears, and even when it feels like nothing is happening, He is setting the stage for your miracle. When His yes comes, you will understand why He made you wait so long. You will see that His silence was not rejection but protection, that His delay was not punishment but preparation, and that His plan was always greater than your expectation. The prophet Isaiah wrote in chapter 55, verse 11, So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. That means that if God has spoken a promise over your life, it will not fade away. It will come to pass, not in your time, but in His perfect time. So stay firm. Do not give up. Do not grow bitter because of how long it's taking. When the time comes, everything will make sense. What burdens you today will become your testimony tomorrow. What hurts you now will strengthen you later. Because God's yes does not come to just anyone. It comes to those who remain faithful, to those who keep believing, to those who keep walking even when there are no visible signs. And when that yes finally comes, when you see the fruit of your prayers, you will realize it was all worth it. Every tear, every wait, every silence. Because you will understand that the greatest gift was not the result itself, but the relationship you built with God along the way. Part 4. God's yes changes your destiny. Dear listener, when God says yes, He doesn't just change your situation, He changes your destiny. His word doesn't act on the surface, it works in the deepest places of your story. It transforms who you were, redirects your path, and takes you to places you never imagined reaching. God's yes has the power to break cycles, heal old wounds, and close chapters you didn't know how to end. God doesn't say yes on a whim. He says yes with purpose. Every time His approval touches your life, something is activated in the spiritual realm. It's as if heaven signs a decree over you, and from that moment on, everything that once opposed you begins to align to fulfill His will. It doesn't matter how many times you failed or how many people rejected you, God's yes carries the authority to give you a new beginning. Look at the story of Moses, an exiled man with a stained past, insecure and afraid. But when God said yes, that very man became a deliverer. God didn't look at his past, He looked at His purpose. And when God's purpose is activated, no chain can hold you. Moses went from fugitive to confronting Pharaoh, because when God says yes, His power backs you. The same is true for you. Maybe you've spent years feeling stuck, seeing little fruit, or believing your dreams were buried. But when God's yes arrives, everything changes. Suddenly doors open, opportunities bloom, and the right people appear. Not because you were enough, but because His grace found you. God's yes not only opens paths, it restores what seemed lost. Many today feel broken, betrayed, or without hope, but God's yes has the power to heal what the world cannot cure. He can raise what you thought was dead, return what you considered unrecoverable, and resurrect what pain took from you. Remember Lazarus, he had died and his family wept without comfort, but when Jesus arrived, He said, "Lazarus, come out." In that instant, death had to release what no longer belonged to it. That's how God's yes works. He commands, decrees, and transforms. What was dead obeys, what was lost returns, and what was broken is made whole. Sometimes we think God's yes only shows up in visible blessings, promotions, miracles, or positive answers. But there is a deeper yes, the yes that changes your heart. It's when God says yes to a new season, and to open it he must close the previous one. That's why some blessings begin with farewells, some doors open just as others shut, and some promises bloom in the middle of pain. God's yes doesn't always feel pleasant at first. Sometimes it hurts, because it means letting go of something or someone. But that pain is necessary to move forward. If God doesn't allow something to be removed, you'll never arrive at what He has prepared. Sometimes His yes comes as a break, a loss, or even a silence. With time, you'll understand it was all part of the same purpose. God sees the whole picture. We only see a piece. He knows what we don't and understands what we haven't yet grasped. That's why His yes arrives at the exact time, neither before nor after. If He gave it earlier, you'd lose it. If He gave it later, you might no longer need it. But when it comes in His perfect time, it changes your destiny. Many are where they are today not because of merit, but because one day God said yes. Perhaps you've lived moments when you know it wasn't your strength that sustained you, or your wisdom that opened the door. It was His favor. God's yes isn't earned, it's received, and when it comes, everything changes. That yes lifts you to places beyond your preparation, connects you with people you never would have met, and gives you opportunities only grace can explain. When God says yes, the impossible becomes possible. And the most beautiful thing about God's yes is that it is permanent. He does not change His mind about you. People can fail, leave, or break promises. But God is not a man that He should lie, nor a son of man that He should repent. If He chose you, He will sustain you. If He promised, He will fulfill it. Dear listener, there are battles you've already won without noticing, simply because God said yes. You may not yet see the victory, but it has been decreed. The enemy can try to delay it, but he cannot annul it. When God authorizes something, neither time nor people nor darkness can stop it. So when you see something collapsing, don't panic. Maybe what's falling wasn't part of God's yes. Maybe He's removing what hindered you to give you what is truly yours. Sometimes His yes starts with a shaking, because before He gives you the new, He must free your hands from the old. When you understand that, you stop resisting. You stop fighting for what left and start giving thanks for what's coming. You realize God never takes anything without intending to give you something better. Every loss hides a promise, and every ending is the beginning of a new yes. God's yes doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes your vision. It teaches you to trust His direction even when you don't understand His route. It teaches you to rest in His will even when it hurts. It teaches you to believe that although you can't see the end, it is already written in your favor. Such is the power of God's yes. It transforms, restores, redirects, and renews. His yes isn't negotiated, halted, or reversed. When He speaks, the universe obeys. When He commands, doors open. And when He chooses you, neither the past nor fear nor opinions can stop what He has already decreed.